Hey everyone, ready to ditch those meeting invites that should have been emails?
Definitely.
Great. Well, today we're diving deep into a book all about handling those tricky situations at work. You know, the disagreements, the conflicts, the times when you feel like everyone's speaking a different language.
Ah, yes, those moments.
Exactly. The book is called Bridging the Divide, Navigating Workplace Conflicts with Clarity and Empathy by Ethan Blakewell.
I've heard good things.
Oh, it's fantastic. And what I really like is it's not your typical boring business book,
Yeah, those can be tough to get through.
right? But this one, it's packed with these real life stories, the kind that make you think, oh, I've totally been there.
Relatable then.
Very relatable. Plus, it gives you actual strategies you can use. No more vague advice.
That's what I like to hear. Practical advice.
Totally. So, speaking of practical, Blakewell kicks off the book with this concept he calls strategic divergence. Basically, it's when teams hit a roadblock because they have different ideas about how to reach a goal.
Hmm.
Have you ever worked on a project where everyone had their own vision and it just stalled?
Oh, absolutely. Happens all the time, right? It's like
Yeah.
everyone's pulling in different directions.
Exactly. And it can be so frustrating. But Blakewell, he has this interesting take on it. He says we should see these situations not as a battle of egos, but as a chance to understand everyone's individual goals and constraints.
That's a really good point. It's not about who's right or wrong, but about finding a solution that works for the whole team.
Right. So instead of getting stuck arguing about who's right, you can start figuring out how to meet everyone's needs.
Makes sense. So how do we actually do that? It's easy to say understand each other's goals, but in the moment, things can get pretty heated.
Totally agree. That's where Blakewell introduces this thing called the 5 whys method. It's actually pretty simple. You just keep asking why to dig deeper into the reasons behind someone's position.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So it's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly. Instead of just accepting someone's initial response, you keep asking why to uncover the real issue. Like, why are they objecting to this idea? Or why are they so passionate about that one?
I see. You're getting to the root of their perspective.
Right. You might discover that what seemed like a personality clash is actually caused by a logistical problem or a past experience. And once you understand that underlying why, it becomes way easier to find a solution.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like that time I was working on a marketing campaign and one person kept shutting down every idea.
Oh, tell me about it. We've all been there.
Yeah, it was frustrating. But eventually we found out they had worked on a similar campaign that had completely flopped. And they were subconsciously trying to avoid repeating those mistakes.
Wow, that's a great example. So, had you not figured out their why, you might have just labeled them as difficult, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But by asking those why questions, we were able to understand their concerns, learn from their past experience, and actually come up with a much stronger campaign.
It's amazing how powerful a simple question can be.
It really is. And Blakewell, he highlights how understanding that why can actually turn a potential conflict into a collaborative learning experience.
It's like turning a negative into a positive.
Exactly. And speaking of collaboration, Blakewell also talks about these unspoken hierarchies that exist in every workplace, those unwritten rules about who has the power.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. He actually shares this story about a developer, Steve, who's in a tough spot because his manager wants him to prioritize a pet project from the VP, even though it'll completely derail their current project. But Steve is afraid to speak up.
Oh, man. I can relate to Steve. It's tough when you feel like you can't push back against someone in a position of authority.
Right. So what do we do in those situations? How do we navigate those tricky unspoken hierarchies?
Well, Blakewell suggests trying to create a safe space for dialogue, where everyone feels comfortable sharing their concerns without worrying about being judged or penalized.
So making sure people feel heard.
Exactly. Sometimes that might involve having a one-on-one chat with the person you're having issues with.
Direct communication.
Yeah. Or sometimes it might mean bringing in a neutral third party, like a mediator or a trusted colleague, to help facilitate a more constructive conversation.
So someone to help everyone see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And sometimes we need to step back and realize that we need outside help. Asking for support isn't a weakness.
I like that. It's about being self-aware and knowing when you need help.
Totally. And Blakewell, he shares this great anecdote about a team that was constantly fighting over resources. They were stuck in this mindset of there's not enough to go around.
Oh, I remember that story. They were basically battling over a limited pool of contractors, right?
Yes. But then the COO steps in and challenges them to think differently. Instead of dividing the resources equally, He encourages them to find a high-impact project that would benefit both teams.
Right. It's about finding that win-win solution.
Exactly. And guess what? They actually came up with a solution that created more value for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's like a fresh perspective can totally change the dynamic.
Absolutely. We can get so caught up in our own perspectives that we miss the bigger picture.
It's so true, and I think that's something we can all learn from. We need to be willing to step outside our own bubbles and see things from different angles.
Definitely. And Blakewell, he also emphasizes the importance of involving everyone who might be affected by the decisions being made, even if they're not directly involved in the conflict. He calls these silent stakeholders.
That's a great point. It's easy to forget about the people who aren't directly involved, but their perspectives matter too.
Right. Like imagine you're implementing a new software system. You might be super focused on the features and functionality, but what about the people who will actually be using that software every day? If their needs aren't considered, you could end up with a system that's technically sound, but completely unusable in practice.
That's a great example. So it's about considering the impact on everyone, not just those at the table.
Exactly. And it's all about communication, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Right. Like, remember that story about the team where everyone was using the same acronym, but they were all thinking about completely different things?
Oh yeah, the lost in translation scenario. Classic.
It happens all the time. We've all been there nodding along like we understand, when in reality, we have no clue what's going on.
I've definitely been there. But the key takeaway is it's always better to over-communicate than to assume everyone's on the same page.
Right. And if you're not sure, just ask.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification.
Okay, so to recap, we've talked about understanding the why, navigating those unspoken hierarchies, involving all the stakeholders, and ensuring clear communication.
Sounds about right.
It's a lot, but Blakewell makes it all so clear and relatable with those great stories. I mean, those stories are what make the book so engaging, right?
Totally. They make it stick with you. And they remind us that these challenges are something we all face. We're all human, and conflict is a part of life, especially at work.
It's true. But the good news is, with the right mindset and tools, we can learn to navigate these conflicts and actually use them as opportunities for growth.
Absolutely. And Blakewell gives us those tools.
He does. Okay, so are you ready to hear more about how to handle conflict effectively?
Let's do it. I'm ready to dive into some more of these stories.
Great, let's get to it.
You know, as we go through all these stories, it really seems like conflicts often come from a lack of empathy.
That's a good point. We've already talked about communication and understanding each other's goals, but yeah, empathy is like the foundation for all of that.
Totally. Empathy is about really understanding the other person's point of view, trying to see the world through their eyes and recognizing their feelings, even if you don't agree with them.
So it's not about giving in or agreeing. It's about really trying to see where they're coming from.
Exactly. And Blakewell, he emphasizes that a lot.
So how do we practice empathy at work? It's so easy to get caught up in our own stuff and forget to consider how our actions might be affecting others.
That's true. It's a constant effort. One technique Blakewell suggests is active listening. You're really focusing on what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally.
So not interrupting them or planning your response while they're still talking?
Right. It's about being present in the moment, asking clarifying questions, and reflecting back what you've heard to make sure you truly understand their perspective.
That reminds me of the story about Chris, the COO, who had to mediate a heated argument between two team members. He didn't just tell them to calm down. He actually sat down with each of them individually and really listened to their concerns.
Yes, that's a perfect example of active listening in action. By taking the time to understand both sides of the story, Chris was able to figure out the root cause of the conflict and find a solution that worked for everyone.
And it wasn't about him imposing his own solution. It was about creating a space for them to work through their differences and find a compromise they could both live with.
Exactly, and that's what empathy allows us to do. It helps us move beyond those win-lose situations and find those win-win solutions. Think about that story about Nadia, the manager who dreaded holiday scheduling because it always led to conflicts and someone feeling like they got the short end of the stick.
Oh yeah, the holiday scheduling nightmare. Every workplace has one.
Right. But instead of just accepting it as an inevitable part of the holidays, Chris, the COO, came up with this brilliant solution. He proposed a holiday swap lottery where everyone could rank their top holiday preferences and then trade their assigned slots.
So it was like a marketplace for holiday shifts.
Exactly. And people actually got excited about it. They felt like their preferences were being considered. It took the sting out of holiday scheduling.
I love that. It's such a creative solution. It's amazing how a little bit of creativity and empathy can go such a long way.
It really can. And you know what's interesting? Blakewell also points out that sometimes the best outcome of resolving a conflict isn't just solving the immediate problem, it's actually about strengthening those relationships between team members.
He talks about how conflict can actually be an opportunity to build trust and deepen relationships. It's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
Right. When we approach conflict with collaboration and empathy, we come out of those tough conversations with a deeper understanding of each other and a stronger sense of purpose.
That reminds me of that story about Maria, the marketing director, who was notorious for her aggressive style and budget
Oh yeah,
negotiations.
Maria.
Yeah.
She always came in guns blazing, ready to fight for every dollar.
It was definitely a clash of styles when the new head of finance, Austin, joined the company. He was all about data and logic and hated confrontation.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It kind of was at first. Maria came in with her usual forceful approach, but Austin wouldn't budge. He just stuck to his spreadsheets, and it seemed like they were at a total impasse.
So how did they break the deadlock? Did someone have to intervene?
Well, it actually took a bit of a wake-up call for Maria. After she basically steamrolled Austin in that initial budget meeting, she suddenly found that every single expense request from her department was being scrutinized and delayed.
Oh, so she won the battle but lost the war.
Exactly. It took a conversation with the CFO for Maria to realize that she needed to change her approach. She had to learn that building relationships with other departments, especially finance, was essential for her success.
It's a good reminder that sometimes those short-term wins can lead to long-term pain.
And a reminder that collaboration is almost always more effective than competition.
Absolutely. And Blakewell emphasizes that throughout the book, the idea that we're all in this together and success isn't a zero-sum game.
It's about building bridges, not walls.
Exactly. Thinking strategically and creating a path that benefits everyone.
I like that. So we've talked about empathy and collaboration. Is there anything else we should keep in mind when trying to apply these principles at work?
One thing I found really insightful was Blakewell's focus on addressing the root causes of conflict, not just the symptoms.
Can you give me an example?
Sure.
Mm.
Let's say you're constantly having issues with a coworker about missed deadlines. You could try to address each missed deadline as a separate problem, but that wouldn't really solve anything. Instead, you need to figure out why they're consistently missing deadlines. Is it a lack of organization, lack of support? Are they feeling overwhelmed?
It's about getting to the heart of the problem.
Exactly. And by understanding those underlying causes, you can find solutions that are more likely to prevent future conflicts. It's like addressing the source of a fire, not just putting out the flames every time they pop up.
That's a great analogy. It reminds me of that time we had issues with a vendor who kept delivering late. Instead of getting frustrated and demanding they meet the deadlines, we took a step back and asked them what was causing the delays.
And what did you find?
It turned out they were having some internal issues that were affecting their ability to meet our timelines. By working with them to address those challenges, we were able to improve their performance and actually strengthen our relationship.
That's a perfect example of how taking a collaborative problem-solving approach can lead to more sustainable solutions.
So to recap, we've talked about empathy, collaboration, and addressing the root causes of conflict. Is there anything else from Blakewell's book that we should highlight?
Oh, there's one more point I think is really important. It's the idea that conflict can actually be a catalyst for innovation.
Really? That's interesting. It seems counterintuitive, but I can see how challenging each other's ideas could lead to new and better solutions.
Exactly. Blakewell argues that when we avoid conflict, we stifle creativity. But when we embrace conflict as an opportunity for growth, we can spark new ideas and find solutions we never would have thought of on our own.
It's like that saying, iron sharpens iron.
Yes, exactly.
That reminds me of that story about John, the junior developer, and his new boss, Sandeep. They initially clashed because Sandeep dismissed all of John's suggestions and just wanted to do things the way they were done at his previous company.
It's so frustrating when people are stuck in their old ways.
It really is. Thankfully, Chris, the COO, stepped in and helped them find a way to blend their expertise.
And what happened?
They ended up designing this amazing user interface that was both innovative and practical. It was a perfect blend of John's fresh perspective and Sandeep's experience.
That's awesome. This
Yeah.
just shows that diversity of thought can be so powerful,
Yeah.
but only if we're willing to listen to each other and be open to different approaches.
And that takes humility, being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers, and sometimes the best ideas come from unexpected places.
So true. So if you want to encourage innovation, don't shy away from conflict. Embrace it as an opportunity to challenge assumptions, spark new ideas, and create something truly remarkable.
Great point. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I just want to make sure we've covered everything. I've talked about empathy, collaboration, addressing the underlying causes of conflict, and embracing conflict as a catalyst for innovation. Anything else we should add?
I think you've covered all the key points, but what I really appreciate about Blakewell's book is that it goes beyond just giving advice. It provides a framework for creating a more positive and productive work environment, where conflict is seen as an opportunity for growth, not something to be avoided.
It's not just about fixing problems, it's about creating a better way of working together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a message that I think everyone can relate to.
Totally agree. Okay, so let's move on to the final chapter and see how Blakewell wraps up his exploration of conflict resolution.
Let's do it. I'm curious to see what he says.
So we've covered a lot. Empathy, collaboration, using conflict to spark innovation. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into bridging the divide, what's the big takeaway? What does Blakewell really want us to remember?
Well, the last chapter kind of ties everything together. He reminds us that even with all these tools and techniques, the real key to resolving conflict is trust.
Trust. It seems so basic, but I guess it makes sense. How does that actually work in the workplace, though?
Well, think about it. When you trust your colleagues, you're more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt. You assume they have good intentions, and you believe you're all working towards the same goals.
So it's like a foundation for healthy communication.
Exactly. When there's trust, it's easier to have those tough conversations, to disagree respectfully, and to find solutions that work for everyone.
Because if you're always suspicious of people's motives, every little disagreement turns into a battle.
Right. But when trust is there, conflict becomes less about defending your territory and more about finding the best path forward for the team.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we build that kind of trust at work? It's easy to say we need more trust, but how do we actually make it happen?
Blakewell gives some good advice. He says it starts with leadership. Leaders need to be trustworthy themselves by being transparent, keeping their promises, and admitting when they make mistakes.
So leading by example.
Exactly. And they need to create a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas, and even disagreeing with the boss without fear of being punished.
That psychological safety we talked about.
Exactly. And it's not just about the leaders. Everyone can contribute to building trust by being reliable, communicating honestly, and treating each other with respect even when they disagree.
So it's those small everyday actions that really matter.
Totally. Trust is built over time through consistent behavior.
It's like that saying, trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair.
Exactly. Which is why we have to be so careful to nurture those relationships and make an effort to show that we're trustworthy.
Blakewell also talks about accountability as being important for trust. It's not enough to just talk about shared values. We have to hold each other accountable for living up to those values.
That's a good point. Accountability isn't about blaming people. It's about making sure everyone feels responsible for their actions and committed to the team's success.
So it requires clear expectations, open communication, and a willingness to address issues head-on.
Right. It's about having those tough conversations sometimes, but doing it in a way that's respectful and focused on finding solutions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, think about what you can take away from this. What can you actually implement in your own work life?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that conflict is a normal part of life, especially at work. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. When we approach conflict with empathy, a collaborative spirit, and a commitment to building trust, we can actually turn those challenges into opportunities for growth and innovation.
Don't forget those why questions either. Taking the time to understand where someone's coming from can often de-escalate a tense situation and lead to a much more productive discussion.
And remember, you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
We all face these challenges. The key is to develop those conflict resolution skills and build strong relationships so you can navigate those challenges and come out stronger as a team.
Great advice. So if you had to pick just one thing to implement from this deep dive, what would it be? What's the one piece of advice that's really sticking with you? Think about it. Let us know what you think.
Until next time, happy collaborating.